Brothers and female brothers, welcome back to Brotherhood Tabletop, where we are finally back home from Las Vegas Open. And today we are going to deliver on that deep dive of the Orc Sorry. Oh, what is that smell? Sorry about that. As I was saying, we're back home from Las Vegas Open. Dalton had to fly home to Virginia early, but we're finally going to deliver on that deep dive of the Orc Record. I guess not. We're going over the Plague Marines today. So, may the blessings of Grandfather Nurgle be upon you, as they are upon us. We got back from Las Vegas Open, and Dalton came home with one of the contagions of rot, and so he was kind enough to spread it throughout the entire household, and he is currently on a plane on his way back home. But we are covering the Plague Marines today. They took third overall in the Grand Tournament, which was kind of an upset and a surprise to a lot of people. Fantastic team. Dalton played them throughout Las Vegas Open. And so we decided to cover them instead of the Orc Rekka crew, which we've already shot and it's got to be edited. It'll be out some point within the next week. That is going to be our next video. By then, there'll be old news and some new team will be announced, but so be it. Dalton was kind enough to record his feelings and experience with the Plague Marines, not just in Las Vegas Open, but throughout his experience with Kill Team. So we've got some pictures, videos, some stuff from the tournament, and his input as to how best to play them, how to use them, what to bring with them, what loadouts to run. So follow along, grab some popcorn, and take a listen. So now we're going into the Datacard section of the Plague Marines. We've got Dalton here, who's leaving town tomorrow, so I wanted to make sure to get him in here since he is the source expert, and he's played the Plague Marines more than anybody I know. Kicking it over to him.
After playing the Plague Marines at LVO, I've picked up a few little tips and tricks that hopefully are pretty helpful as you guys go ahead. So we'll start off with the faction rules. Starting off, they have the Astartes code word, which pretty standard stuff. The big difference to notice on these is it does say that you can use the psychic weapon twice, as well as the bolter or bolt pistol, which is going to come into play on the Plague Caster.
So not only can you shoot twice or fight twice, you get to do psychic twice too?
Absolutely, which the Plague Caster has 2 psychic shoots, so you can actually use both of them in the same turn, which is absolutely fantastic.
That's insane.
So the 2 big faction rules on this team, which are going to be different from other people, are the Disgustingly Resilient, which pretty much anytime you take damage 3 or more, you get to roll a d6. On a 4 up, you subtract 1 damage from that, so it's kind of similar to the old school Feel No Pains in 40k. And then the big one that really changes things for these guys is the poison ability. So whenever you poison somebody, you give them a poison token. If they have a poison token on them, whenever they activate, it's going to inflict 1 damage on them, as well as give them other abilities, which we'll get into on the ploys and characters.
So it's not enough that you have 2 faction rules. The Plague Marines actually get 3.
Yeah, as long as you're counting Astartes, absolutely, which the more the better, because Grandpa Nurgle's number is 3 as well as 7.
Cool. All right, so with the faction rules covered, we're going to go into team composition.
So team composition is pretty basic. They are elite units, so you only get to take 6 into battle. The box does come with 7 people, so you will always be leaving 1 at home. Pretty much you're always going to have your Plague Marine champion, and then you have 5 Marines from the following selection: the Bombardier, the Fighter, Heavy Gunner, Icon Bearer, Malignant Plague Caster, and the Warrior. So we're going to go ahead and get into each of those guys individually. So your champion is pretty much always going to be brought along. He has a standard plasma pistol, which we're going to pretty much always supercharge that unless obscuring comes into play because it's a lot more fun.
Rolling hot.
The big thing that he has going for him is the Plague Sword, which has the toxic keyword. So this is where those poison counters are going to come into play. Anytime that he hits somebody that already has a poison counter on them, he's going to deal +1 to his damage stat, which is fantastic after 5 hits, especially in combat, because the second you hit him, you give him a poison counter, and then all of your attacks after that deal extra damage.
So he's got a poop knife.
Absolutely. Great big poop knife. The other ability that he has is called Grandfather's Blessing. Grandfather's Blessing, which is whenever an enemy operative that has one of the poison tokens on it loses a wound within 7 inches of this operative, he regains 1 lost wound to a maximum of 3. So he does get to heal a little bit as he goes.
So then the champion's a must take because you've got to have a leader unit. So what else you got?
So after that is going to be your Bombardier, which I think is super duper fun. With the Astartes rule, he does get to fight twice. So he does have the bolt gun. Unfortunately, for a melee profile, he just has fists. But if you take some of the equipment with you, which we'll get into later, his bolt gun is going to give him the poison characteristic. The Grenadier ability allows you to use both their blight grenades and crack grenades, regardless of what equipment you choose to take with you, and it doesn't count towards limited uses, which the really good thing on that is whenever you're using either of those 2 weapon profiles, he gets a +1 to hit stat because of the Grenadier. And if you're using the blight grenades, he also gets to include the toxic rule. So ideally, you shoot with the bolt gun, poison them, and then throw the grenade, because then it deals the additional toxic damage. Next up, we have the Plague Marine Fighter, which he does not have a ranged profile. So if you take grenades, he can throw those. But other than that, you're just looking at getting up close and personal with his Flail of Corruption, which is a fantastic weapon. 5 attacks on a 3-up, and it does brutal, severe, shock, and poison. So with that severe, you're guaranteed to get at least 1 crit. Brutal means that they can't block any of your attacks unless they use a crit, and that shock is going to let that crit take 1 of their standard attacks away, which is always fantastic.
I've been hit with that flail before, and it sucks.
The Astartes rule lets him fight twice, which means that you can deal a ton of damage with this weapon, but if he has already taken a lot of damage and you don't want to risk it, he does have an ability that lets you just deal D3 +2 damage to any operative that is both visible and within 2 inches of this operative. So that's just automatic damage that you can send through. Plus, if you roll a 3 on that D3, it does give them poison tokens as well. All right, so this is where I'm going to make my first recommendation on this team, is with the Plague Marine Heavy Gunner. In the Gallowdark map, he is fantastic, but in Volcus, his Plague Spear only has a range of 7 inches, which kind of makes it less than ideal. However, going back to Gallowdark, he does have the Torrent 2-inch ability, which automatically gives him lethal 5s, which is fantastic. And when you're rolling 5 dice that hit on 2 up, that can deal a ton of damage really quickly and throw out those poison counters. All right, so another must-have that you're going to want to bring along all the time is your Plague Marine Icon Bearer. Not only does he have the Icon Bearer code word, where he gets the +1 APL when we're talking about who's in control of
the objective.
Whenever we're talking about who's in control of the objective, he also has an ability called Icon of Contagion, which whenever he is on the battlefield, The Contagion strategy ploy, which we'll get into a little bit later, it costs 0 CP as long as he's on the field.
Nice.
Also, he does carry a plague knife and a bolt pistol, so he's actually a pretty good fighter just as a general rule. All right, next up we have the Malignant Plague Caster, who's another person that I recommend you always bring with you because he's going to be your healer as well as a fantastic damage dealer. Like I said earlier, the Astartes code word allows him to shoot twice even with psychic abilities. So he has the Entropy ability, which hits really hard. It's 4 attacks on a 3-up with a 3-7 damage profile. So that hits like a truck, but it has a 7-inch range on it. But the Saturate, Severe, and Poison is always really good. The Plague Wind ability doesn't have a range on it, and it's 6 attacks on a 3-up. Also has Torrent 1, which gives it lethal 5s in the Gallowdark map. Along with those two, he does have 2 abilities. One is Poisonous Miasma, which any operative that is visible to and within 7 inches of this operative, or that is a valid target of this operative, you just give him one of your poison tokens. If it already has a poison token, it inflicts 3 damage on that enemy. Or he has, like I said, your healing ability, which is Putrescent Vitality. It allows you to roll 2d6 for any friendly operative within 3 inches of this guy. If the result is exactly 7, they regain 7 lost wounds, which is crazy. If not, they regain whatever the higher of the 2d6 you rolled is. Not to mention his Corrupted Staff also is a pretty good ability because of its Severe, Shock, Stun, and Poison abilities. So that Severe is going to give you an automatic crit, and the second you hit with that crit, Shock and Stun come into play, so you take away one of their APL next turn, as well as throw away one of their regular hits for that fight. All right, last but not least, you have your Plague Marine Warrior. So in the Vulcus map, I would actually recommend taking him instead of your Heavy Gunner, because he has a bolt gun and plague knife, which his bolt gun's different than everybody else on this team in that it also has the toxic keyword. So if you're running the Plague Rounds equipment, it gives it Poison, Severe, and Toxic. So it not only gives those poison counters, but boosts the damage on that shoot twice. Plus the Plague Knife is a much better melee profile than the Heavy Gunner's just fists. He also does have an ability called Repulsive Fortitude, which is whenever someone is shooting at this operative, defense dice of 5-up are retained as critical successes, which is super handy in those long-range matches like Vulcus.
So finally, we've got equipment. We're going to go over the faction equipment because everybody's got the same universal, and so you can go through those on your own time. But Dalton knows the majority of the faction equipment by heart. I'll let him handle it.
So first one we have is the Plague Bells, which basically it just lets you ignore any changes to stats from damage on any of your Plague Marines, so that's always really good. One I recommend always be taken is the Plague Rounds. It gives all of your bolt weapons the poison and severe weapon characteristics. One you can choose to take or not. I personally like it, but the Poison Vents, anytime an enemy operative has an activation within 3 inches of one of your Plague Marines, instead of inflicting the 1 wound, you inflict D3 wounds, which is super handy, especially if they're very low on life.
Yeah.
And then, depending on who you're fighting, the last faction equipment I do really like is the Blight Grenades. It's basically exactly the same as Frag Grenades as far as attacks, hits, and damage and all that stuff. It just also has the severe and poison rules on it. And if your Bombardier is using it, it also does get that +1 to hits as well as the toxic characteristic.
Yeah, those are brutal. So that covers our faction equipment. Like I said, you can mix and match that with the universal, but Dalton definitely ended up taking all 4 faction equipment most rounds, right?
Yeah, if I was going against some really heavy hitters, I would swap out the Blight Grenades for the Crack Grenades, but other than that, I pretty much always carried them.
Good to know. All right, so next we're going to go through all the strategy ploys.
All right, moving on. So the strategy ploys, the first 2 I'm going to go over, I pretty much use every single turning point, and the last 2 are more situationally used. So Contagion, which is kind of the thing that makes these guys a nightmare when you try to fight against them in melee combat. Anytime somebody is within control range of a Plague Marine, or if they have a poison token and are within 3 inches invisible to one of the Plague Marines, they are going to come into this Contagion, which automatically subtracts 2 inches from the move stat of any enemy operative, and it also worsens the hit stat of all of its weapons by 1. So if at any point someone activates close to you and they try to shoot or try to fight one of your guys, if they used to hit on 3s, now they hit on 4s, or if they used to hit on 4s, now they hit on 5s, so they're basically not hitting you at all.
I can definitely say that Contagion is a nightmare when it comes to charging and fighting. It's something easy to forget about and punishes you for doing that.
So the next one I'm going to talk about is Lumbering Death, which, especially for your heavy gunner in Gallowdark, if you set him up on guard, is fantastic. But if a Plague Marine hasn't moved more than 3 inches during their turn, or whenever it's retaliating, all of its weapons have the Ceaseless characteristic, which allows it to re-roll any one number of your choice. So the third one, like I said, this is more of a situational, but Cloud of Flies, you get to place a marker somewhere on the map, and any Plague Marine that is wholly within 3 inches of that marker is going to get the obscured rolls for it. So it's basically a smoke grenade, but
Still helpful.
yeah, it's good, and it's in certain circumstances.
What's the radius on that?
3 inches.
Oh, so better than a smoke grenade.
Yeah.
That's only 1 inch.
Yeah, it's a smoke grenade, but a little longer. Last one, Nurglings, same deal. It's kind of situational, but it can be really clutch. You select an enemy operative within 3 inches of a friendly Plague Marine, or an enemy that is within 7 inches that has a poison token, and until the end of that operative's next activation, subtract 1 from its APL stat. So if you're fighting for control over an objective or something like that, that can come in really handy. Or if you want to sort of take away somebody's options as far as shooting, fighting, or moving, that's going to be pretty good as well.
And then, of course, after the strategy ploys, we've got the firefight ploys.
All right, so we'll start off with my absolute favorite one just because of how mad it makes other people. Curse of Rod.
Oh, God.
Whenever one of your Plague Marines is fighting against or shooting against an enemy operative within 3 inches of it, or within 7 inches if that operative has one of your poison tokens, any 3s that your opponent rolls, you get to take those away. They automatically become fails. They cannot be re-rolled, and your enemy takes 1 wound for each one of those 3s. So if they hit on 3 ups, you can take all those 3s away from them, make them fails, they can't re-roll them, and then you can really deal some damage with it as well.
I have had that firefight ploy personally devastate an entire turning point.
So next up is Poisonous Demise, which, pretty simple. Whenever one of your Plague Marines is incapacitated, you can effectively have them blow up and put a poison token on somebody, or if they already have a poison token, they deal 1 damage to them. All right, so next up is Virulent Poison, which I honestly really don't use, but it's if an enemy is within 3 inches of one of your operatives, you can give them a poison token. If they are 7 inches away from you, you can roll 2d6, and on a 7 up, you can give it one of your poison tokens. But if they already have a poison token, it really doesn't do anything. That's pretty much only useful if you want to trigger that toxic keyword before you actually attack.
Very situational.
The last one, which is super helpful, is called Sickening Resilience, which for that interaction basically allows you to no longer roll on your Disgustingly Resilient. All of them just pass. So if someone has, say, 5 hits coming after you for 3 damage each, you can take 5 damage off of that total for 1 CP, which honestly is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's a unit saver for sure. If at any point during that deep dive, the thought occurred to you that maybe showering just isn't going to happen anymore, then I think the Plague Marines might be for you. You get the gifts of Papa Nurgle, You make best friends with nerdlings, and this team has tons of them on the models. And with all the whispers of the warp in your ear, you're never going to feel like you're alone. So we hope that this information helped you figure out if this was a team that you wanted to play, or if you don't want to play it, whether it's a team that you can beat on the tabletop and help you figure out how to do it. They're a tough team. They play very thematically, the way that you would expect Death Guard and Plague Marines to play. And there's some challenges to overcome. Melee combat against that contagion is not very fun. I can tell you that from personal experience. And that's the Plague Marine deep dive. Next up is going to be the Orc Recca crew. We promise to get that video out sooner rather than later. We've got a Las Vegas Open recap video from the tournament and our first experience at Las Vegas Open coming out as well. So with that, thank you for following along as we get better at filming, editing, and playing Kill Team and eventually other Warhammer and tabletop games as well. Like, subscribe, and follow along as we build our community. Welcome to the Brotherhood. See you in the next one.